So our next section is on financial schemes. So this is going to be directed mainly to Patrick now. And we've got a few questions here, so we'll see how far we can get down the list. First question is, how can the recent government measures benefit me as a startup? I wonder whether, Patrick, it'd be worth just summarising what those government measures are first.
Government measures, I guess, can be split into a couple of categories, right? Because even way before this COVID-19 came on board, we already have the ESG support schemes such as the Startup SG Founder Grant, as well as the Startup SG Tech. And prior to that, you have your other ESG schemes as well. So I think with the onset of this COVID-19, clearly the MES and the Ministry of Finance have announced a lot more schemes, and a lot of them are actually parked under ESG as well. Right. So if under the fintech, clearly you have the salary subsidy for new recruits or new grads from Polytechnic. You have your digital acceleration grant, up to 120,000. And broadly speaking, you also have your JSS, which is a job support scheme, which is applicable to most companies. And very importantly, they have enhanced the EDG grant. And this helps to build on your core capability, helps companies to do innovation and productivity. So you'd be surprised to know that even though startups are deemed as very technologically advanced, but this grant itself allows them to further their journey, to even combine resources with or look at new technology they'll be able to incorporate into existing offering. Right? So I think this is a very good time for that because the costs tend to be lower as well and easier to get manpower and resources. And the last part I think is very important as well. It's really the market access grant, right? As part of the EDG. That provides some kind of support if you're looking at expansion into the regional market. And this is pretty much in line with the topic for today, right? Turning crisis into opportunities. I think other than that, I think the usual support schemes are there. So I think it doesn't fit for every single startup. So it really depends on the situation the startup is in.
Okay. So in terms of the actual benefits to startups in general, you think the schemes that are already existing, as well as what's come out of the Temporary Measures Act, is really sufficient? Every country has done things differently.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I'm helping with quite a few startups in my personal capacity. So the schemes are never enough, right? We always want to have more schemes. But then the key for startup is we don't look at schemes to survive, right? More importantly, that sort of just helps us to accelerate the growth. And in difficult times like this, we'll try to tap on those to help us to expand, help us to do things even better, right? So for any startup that sort of depends on scheme, right from day one, I think that's very dangerous.
Yeah, I understand. So, okay, so there's a more specific question now, which is, I have gone to the banks, but I've not heard from them for more than 2 weeks already. How do I resolve this, and how else can I benefit from the other schemes?
To be honest, I really have no answer to that because even though I think the MES have come out with this temporary bridging loan program, essentially that helps to defray the risk incurred by the banks to be able to lend to SMEs. And startup belongs to SMEs, right? But at the end of the day, the selection criteria due to how you do the application, I think that doesn't really change. So there's really no one-size-fits-all kind of answer. And whether that scheme itself would allow more startups to get direct funding, it is, to be honest, it is still unknown.
Okay, so you talked, Patrick, about this is the time to take opportunities really for these companies and using support of the Singapore schemes. But one of the things that comes out of the Singapore Temporary Measures Act is really to help companies which are really struggling, which I'm sure there are some people on this call who are really struggling. So how much should they take advantage of these, the force majeure to relieve them of fulfilling contracts and financial distress part of all that? So
yeah,
do you think they should just be reinvesting in what they've got?
I think that's very challenging because if you look at the current situation, in fact, I'm firefighting for 2 or 3 startups that because of the current situation, it's very difficult for them to reach out to clients, and the clients, a lot of them have sort of put on hold to adopt a wait and see, including investors. So would that constitute an exceptional situation? Well, it depends how you look at it. Right? It's part and parcel of a startup life cycle. So the scheme itself doesn't quite sort of cater to that, but it really helps those that really have a longer term view, able to support them, help them to smooth out this, throughout this whole cycle.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the experience you've got with the startups you're helping, what are their big issues?
The biggest issue here is, I think, what Alvin has previously mentioned. All right. Number one, it's how do they further the traction? But bearing in mind, when you go for fundraising, you put it in your pitch deck to say that you are targeting X number of clients and sign-ups within the next 6 months, 12 months. But in this current climate, it's proving to be very challenging, right? And it's no help that a lot of the investors are taking a longer time, right, to do the due diligence. So to some of the startups that we are working with, we help them to create the virtual data room online, and it's no point writing too much. But very importantly, is for those with a combination of hardware and software, it would be good, right, to show pictures and videos of how you implement those systems, because investors can no longer do a site visit, right? So they can only rely on the videos and the pictures that you put on the screen for them and to them.
Okay, very good. So the next question is, and maybe I should answer this one, are there non-traditional sources of finances, alternative funding sources and go-to for help other than the government funding? So Patrick, would you like to start on that, and then maybe I'll come in as well?
Okay, in the last couple of weeks, I've linked up quite a few startups to venture debt funds, as well as some family offices to look at, bridging, this period, right? I mean, it's pretty challenging, right? And like what Prof mentioned, right? Voucher capitalists, that's something that we got to be careful about as well. The other platforms could be the P2P or even the funding platforms. But I guess it's an industry-wide issue. So the alternative for me, at least, would be really the family offices as well as the venture debt.
Okay, Alvin, would you like to comment on this space? This is also your space.
Probably depending if the family offices have not been badly affected in their by the public market situation in itself. I guess that's also one potential way to reach out to them as well. I mean, some of them do invest in angel investments. Some of them do are participating in VC funds as LPs as well. So, but then again, I don't have anything else to add to Patrick's advice and suggestion. Yeah.
So I think from my experience, there were two. One is obviously the global experience. So I think you're both right. The family offices are very important, but particularly the family offices in the Middle East. Mm. So they've actually increased the amount of capital they've now got for investments in startups. They've seen this as an opportunity rather than a threat. And obviously that money is coming not just from the traditional family office, but some of the wealthiest families in the world, which are essentially sovereign wealth funds. So they've stepped up, and we could probably post a website link to that after this. The other source of funding that I've used in our companies is to go back to the customers. Yeah. So actually go to your MNC customers and say, look, we may not be able to supply you if we can't maintain our business and so on. And that has worked. So we are our Finnish companies actually has got money from Mars. So Mars, the very large food organization, and Mars has basically just covered their entire shortfall. So they've taken a little bit of equity, but mostly, it's just to keep the company going. So because they will need them after the lockdown period as well. Okay, Patrick again. How can Singapore safeguard the interests of SMEs and startups during a crisis?
I think it's this particular question, I think, really refers to the liquidity, the cash flow, because we all know that startups typically don't survive not because of business model, but it's because of the lack of cash flow or the lack of planning for sufficient cash flow. So I think Singapore, with all the various grants, the temporary bridging loan program, the various grants, hopefully, it will helps exciting ones to survive, notwithstanding the fact that the environment is very, very challenging.
Yes. Okay. All right. So you feel the government is doing what I always say actually is that, when I look across the world, Singapore has one huge advantage. It has savings. And what it has in So as the finance minister said, this is the rainy day Singapore has been saving for. So
Yeah.
Whereas, in the UK, where they only have debt, so all they're doing is increasing their debt to keep companies going. So I think, to be honest, I think if you're going to do a startup, Singapore is probably one of the 2 or 3 countries in the world, I think, that can actually maintain it. Of course, there is a negative consequence of all these savings being used in 19. You probably noticed that Temasek's portfolio value has dropped to 3rd.
Yeah, that's right.
They've got less money to future.